they sent me to Hamilton Air Force Base in San Francisco, California. Yeah, we went on a train, and I remember passing orange orchards. I never had seen anything like that, and yeah, it was. They sent me to a beautiful base. It was just beautiful, Hamilton Air Force Base. They put me on the job training, which I loved, job training. I didn't want to go to school again. They put me on a job training to communications. I was in communications, and I was in a office with about 42 men. They had plotting boards. This was war, and it was very serious. This was plotting boards and plot aircraft. All around the room was plotting boards, and I was in a corner with a switchboard, just the plugs. And I would fix all the calls. There were generals and all the officers, a lot of officers in there, and they had me doing calls to the Pentagon, and it was just, I loved it. I just loved it. Okay. And then I did cross-train about a week into teletype. They put me in that, which I loved. Teletype now, I don't guess there's such a thing, but it was good.
I was only in there for such a short time. I was assigned in the G2 Intelligence Committee or job, and I was on patrol. Sometimes at night we'd have to stay up in our barracks. We'd had to stay there and stay all night in case anything happened, to do a check. So that was kind of like a security guard position. But I never did get on KP. Every time I was set up to go on kitchen patrol, my boss said I was needed at the office, and he got me out of. You know, when you're a high school graduate, just because you have that degree doesn't mean you really know how to handle a job. But the job that I had, we had to outline what we were supposed to do and in the order that we were supposed to do it. And the same when we were even at our barracks, we had certain protocols that we had to follow. So I think it really helped me to be organized. It helped me to also not exactly be a neat freak, but to keep my surrounding areas neat. And the locker had to be just so, because when they inspected, you know, you had to do that. But as far as learning any other jobs, no, it was more secretarial, bookkeeping, and retaining some of the things that we saw on the telecommunications and things like that to make good decisions.
Well, I stayed on at Fort Jackson. I did my advanced individual training there also. It was to become an administrative specialist, would be my job title once I became a soldier. And that was another 8 weeks of training. And once that was over and we graduated, then my first duty station sent me 6,000 miles across the world to South Korea. Oh. I wanted to be computer specialist is what I wanted. I wanted to be able to, you know, program and fix computers. But they had a long waiting list, and it was going to be like 2 years before I could get that. And I thought, I'm not waiting that long, so I'm just going to go with what they have available at this time. So that's what I did. I was in Korea for 12 months. They sent me, it was September of '86, and I was there till September of '87. So I got to experience all the seasons, especially the cold one and the wet one.
While I was at the Air Force Academy, they took us all that summer on an airplane ride in a little T-37, which is a side-by-side airplane. There's 2 jet engines, and so I got to fly with a guy who was retired. Well, he was still a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force who'd been a pilot in Vietnam. And it's beautiful out there, big white puffy clouds. And so he goes, okay, today our job is to get as close to those clouds as we can without touching them. Now, the only time I've ever flown before was when I flew from Greenville to Colorado. So this is my second time in an airplane. And so we get out there and oh my gosh, it was awesome. We did loops and rolls and it was the greatest thing ever. So after we landed, I just thought that is the coolest thing ever. And I looked around and a lot of people did not have that response. A lot of people were a little green and a little sick, but boy, I thought this is awesome. So I think I got the bug right then. Because I'd gone on that flight and I'd taken some engineering courses, which I liked. And so I was going to major in mechanical engineering. And I went to Air Force ROTC and said, you know, I'm Jane Dyer. I'd like a pilot slot and a scholarship. And so I was talking to a sergeant. He goes, we can't do that. I said, well, can I talk to somebody else? And I spoke to the major. He goes, we can't do that. I said, can I speak to someone else? And so I talked to the colonel and he goes, well, we can give you the scholarship today because you're majoring in mechanical engineering and we'll work on the pilot slot, which I obviously finally got before I graduated because there were only, you know, they didn't start taking women until 1978 and this was in 1980. So they were, you had to fight for them. So he was very helpful and I was very fortunate to get a pilot slot.
Where exactly did you go while you were in the Air Force?
So here I am back at Clemson. I got my pilot slot. I'm going to graduate. Also at Clemson, I will say that I was also the first female who was commander of Air Force ROTC at Clemson. So I did that, and then I was selected for my pilot slot. So I was the first female from Clemson to get to go to Air Force pilot training. So I was very fortunate. And so I got my pilot slot. I got stationed to a place called Laughlin Air Force Base in Del Rio, Texas. So if you know about Texas, you go to San Antonio and you keep driving due west toward Mexico, you hit the Rio Grande, and that's Del Rio, Texas. It is in the middle of nowhere. So the sergeant says again to me, he goes, Ballard, what have you done? I went, I don't know. He goes, nobody from Clemson has ever had to go to Laughlin. I went, oh gosh. So I had figured out that if I were going, that it probably had to do with a few women and they were trying to make sure we were all separated out there. So sure enough, I go to Laughlin Air Force Base and in my class of 60 students for pilot training, of course, I'm the only female. And there are 59 guys, of which, yet again, probably 50 really wished I weren't there. So I was at Laughlin there for a year, and then I went to Dyess Air Force Base in Abilene, Texas, just 3 hours north, and then I went back to Del Rio to be a T-37 instructor. So my entire Air Force career, which I joined to see the world, I got to see 7 years of West Texas. I don't want to see it again.
My career was a little different from most because once I graduated from boot camp, I came back to college because I enlisted in the reserves. It was a program called a split option program where I graduated on Friday and I was back at Clemson on Sunday. So that was a little strange. I didn't even answer to my first name for a while, but and then the following summer, I went to my job school, my military occupational school, which is as an administrator. But in the meantime, I was assigned to the Greenville Reserve Unit, ammunition company here in Greenville. And so I drilled 1 weekend a month. And then in that next summer, I went to my MOS school. So I was part of a unit, but continuing to learn my trade within the Marine Corps. Well, with the reserves, it's a little different because you have to find a job opening at the unit that's closest to you. So administration was the job that was available at the time I joined. So I was just ready to become a Marine. And strangely enough, at the end of my 22 years, those skills that I learned at that first school as a record book clerk came in handy. It was just a full circle moment later when I worked in Manpower, which is the personnel headquarters for the Marine Corps. All those little things I learned back then paid off great dividends at the end of my career. I continued in the reserves until I graduated college, and upon graduation I went to officer candidate school at Quantico, which is like boot camp version for officers. And then after completion of that, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant, and from there I was on active duty until my retirement in 2014. Once on active duty, I went from Quantico and then was out on the West Coast for several tours, San Diego, at our recruit depot there. Also, I had a really great job of the Motion Picture TV Liaison Office in Los Angeles. And then the Marine Corps actually sent me back to graduate school, and I picked Clemson, so I came back home for a little while. Then I was at a Marine Corps Air Station in North Carolina, and then back up to Quantico, where I served the last 6 years of my career.
I originally, again, I was in Tallahassee, Florida, graduated from college right away. Within a week, I was in Gulfport, Mississippi, where I was doing my training for my particular career field, which was at personnel.
Can you remember getting to Mississippi, and if so, what was that initial experience like once you arrived there?
Yeah, again, it was just, again, that's the excitement of starting something fresh and new, of being in a new place, of actually living and working on a military installation, which of course was our ultimate goal when we were going through our training. So again, just very exciting. So when you go through ROTC, there are some exceptions to that, but generally speaking, they fill what's available, and that's where you go.
Okay.
Unless, of course, you're an engineer. If you have particular training for something, obviously they're going to put you in that career field. But for me, as a business major, I could go wherever they needed me, and that's where they selected, and that's where I went.
So my first assignment was down to Charleston, South Carolina for Nuclear Machinist Mate A School. And I loved it. I fell in love with South Carolina while I was there. And just the weather, never having to deal with snow in the winter, just really enjoyed it. And it was a lot of technical learning, mechanic type skills, how to fit pipes, how to make sure you're using the proper tools. So my first duty station was very enjoyable. I was grateful that I had a pretty high ASVAB score with the entrance test for the military, and so Nuclear Machinist Mate was one of my options, and it came with a signing bonus, so it was kind of, as an 18-year-old kid, it seemed like the right choice to make, because who doesn't want a little extra cash in their pocket? So I really enjoyed it. Once I got into the field, it was definitely very grueling, lots of long hours studying, but I loved being a nuclear machinist mate, and I actually got to go on after that initial school to an additional school where I studied chemical and radiological controls for nuclear reactors. So I was in charge of making sure that the water chemistry was always correct and that the radiation levels coming off the reactor were safe for the other sailors on the ship.
With this being the early 1950s, I guess this would have been service during the Korean conflict.
Yes.
Now, during the couple years that you were in active service, did you see combat?
No, thank goodness.
And I don't know if this question really would apply, but were there casualties in the unit that you served with here?
No, not there. There was Travis Air Force Base. That's where they sent all the casualties from the war, some of them there. And I did go, I had a friend that was wounded real bad. And I did happen to go one Sunday and spend all day with him. They were wounded everywhere. It was not good. So I did get to see the wounded and stay with him.
Once I came back to the United States, a Desert Storm happened, and so I had orders to deploy, but they were sending us, at certain, increments and stuff, and I was supposed to leave in March, and then the president kind of put an end to it before then. But they still kind of kept us on what they called the standby system. So if things picked back up, then I would have gone. I didn't see the combat, but I did see the men and women who came back from combat.
Well, you could say that we were, our mission in Abilene, Texas, I flew, my first assignment was flying the KC-135, which is an air refueling airplane, which refuels the B-52s, which at the time had all the nuclear bombs on them. And then, of course, we refuel all the other, we refuel fighters, we refuel attack airplanes, we refuel all kinds of airplanes. So when I was there, it was during the Cold War. So our job basically wasn't to fly. Our job was to stay current so that if Russia, who had nuclear subs and airplanes and land-based missiles all pointed at America to blow us up, thousands times over or 100 times over, and we had the same to blow them up. Well, I was sitting alert with the B-52s that had the nuclear bombs. So they are so heavy that there's no way they could make it all the way to Russia. So the plan was that we would go with them and refuel them halfway so they could make it to Russia and drop their bombs. And so that was back in what they call the Cold War.
I served throughout what we call GWOT timeframe, Global War on Terrorism. Started at the end of the Cold War, but then ended up in the GWOT timeframe. I was deployed to Afghanistan in 2007, where I served with a command within the capital city of Kabul. My job during my deployment was an advisor to the Afghan National Army. So I was out and about. So while my job was not in Marine Corps language to seek and destroy the enemy, I was out and about. So there was always, at that time frame, one of the biggest dangers were roadside bombs, IEDs. So one of the convoys I was in, while I was never personally hit by anything, my convoy did take an IED. I was in the 4th vehicle. The 5th vehicle was hit by a hastily emplaced IED. My command did suffer some casualties. At that time, they were ones that you've probably heard about in the news, where someone dresses up like a member of the Afghan National Army and ambushed some of our colleagues. So, I mean, it was real. I mean, we were there. It's Afghanistan. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was a dangerous time, but we were very focused on our mission there, which meant we were out and about with the local, businesses, local population, local school children. So it was just part, we were in a combat zone, so we knew what to expect.
I think the one that's most predominant for me was Operation Iraqi Freedom. That's when it all kicked off. In 2003 is when the war originally started. We just basically were part of everything from the start for shock and awe. That was probably the biggest recollection and my biggest involvement. So I personally did not deploy. I was one that was held back, but my job was ensuring that everyone got out. So it was, basically constant review of who's ready, who's eligible, who's capable, getting the right people in the right place, and literally getting them through deployment lines and getting them on a plane and out the door. For us, our particular unit and wing upon deployment, we lost 2 pilots during that tour.
When I got to my actual ship, which is the USS Carl Vinson, it's an aircraft carrier that at the time was home ported out of San Diego, we were in Operation Enduring Freedom, and we went on deployment to the Persian Gulf in support of that, really boots on the ground support. Because being an aircraft carrier, we supplied air support, bombs, surveillance, that kind of thing. We were actually very lucky on our deployment. We did lose a couple pilots, but it was actually a training accident. As we were transitioning over to the Gulf, we were outside of Hawaii and 2 of our jets collided and we lost one of the pilots. Outside of that, we were very, very lucky. We didn't lose anyone else on deployment. We didn't ever have any men overboard or any other incidences. So that actually does stick out to me because we were lucky, and that's very uncommon. So.
Well, we had alerts. Of course, it was during the war. We had alerts, and we knew where to go. And it was to a ravine and fall. You had to get down on the ground. And at the time, before that, we got married in there. I met a career man. And we started our family. And that morning I was pregnant. And you couldn't be pregnant and in service back then.
Oh.
So I had to, I tested it long enough, so I went and put my papers in after the alert was over and got out, and we lived off base in an apartment, and then they sent my husband to Japan, and I came back home to stay.
Okay. Well, I guess I could go back to Korea for one. Being there in the wintertime and having to be outdoors, for great periods of time we had to do what we, was called guard duty. And everybody had to do that. And I can remember it was in the month of November, and it was just, the temps get really low, very cold, and it's a different type of cold. And I can remember my feet, telling myself they're never ever going to be warm again. But eventually they did. But after my duty, I made sure I got somewhere I could get my feet warm.
How long were those shifts that you were on guard duty?
We usually did that for about 12 hours. We would rotate. Sometimes it could be, shorter in increments of 4 hours. But
I'll say a funny one. Obviously I like funny things. So speaking of this, KC-135, we had to go on Wednesday morning and stay on the base in a building for 7 days and nights we had to be within minutes of getting to the airplanes, get on the airplanes, having them ready to launch. That was our job. And so you couldn't go off base, and sometimes you couldn't even leave the building, depending on what level of code we were at. And so I will say that for all the guys who would prefer that we were not there, there were 2 other women pilots who are still my dearest friends. In fact, in the times of Zoom, we talk once a week still, many, many years later. And one is currently a captain at United, and one's a captain at American Airlines, and I was a captain at FedEx, so we were all very fortunate. But they're so funny, and of course they spaced us out, so there were 3 cycles, so we never got to sit alert at the same time. But at one time, we got up real early on a Saturday to go play racquetball in the gym. And so the klaxon goes off, which means you drop whatever you're doing, you jump into the truck, you go flying over to the base, and you have to know a code and get through the special fence to get us into the nuclear area. And so we go zooming in. So of course all the colonels come out to watch as everybody is responding to make sure it all goes well. And so the colonels are all lined up, and the 3 of us are in a truck together, and we're just waving. You can see on their face, they're going, oh my gosh, there's no telling what they're going to do. But we all got in our 3 airplanes, and of course we did flying. So that was fun.
I tell everyone the 7 months that I was in Afghanistan was the most rewarding 7 months of my 22-year career. I went there to be able to advise the officers in the Afghan National Army. That included a section of women officers, and I was able to work with them on their family support programs. I was able to help with their nationwide literacy programs, their retention programs for their soldiers. It was just the opportunity to interact with the people of Afghanistan and to know why we were there was helping them. It's just, there's no other way. There really aren't many words that really can capture just the opportunity to make a difference, and I know that we made a difference. Throughout my career, I had so many opportunities to travel, to go on ships, to fly on airplanes, helicopters. I mean, there's so many highlights, but the biggest thing that I will always take away from the 22 years are the people. I miss my fellow Marines every day, but I'm still connected with them. So if I'm trying to describe my career, it's just the opportunities I was given, educational opportunities, just the chance to see the country, see parts of the world, to serve. It sounds cliche and sappy sometimes, but we did it to serve. So one of the tough things afterwards is just how do you continue to serve? And participating in an interview like this is a way I can give back and talk about my time, because as I talk about my time, I also represent all the Marines I served with.
Honestly, for me, it was a very interesting time for me because of things going on in my personal life as well. I had just had a baby. So I was actually on maternity leave as the war was kicking off. And so it was fast and furious. Like my husband, I literally had just had a baby. My husband was leaving. My husband was a pilot. He was part of that shock and awe phase, so he was leaving right away. I had a 6-week-old baby, And of course, work is like, we need you. So, you know, that was about the time my maternity leave was up anyway. So for me, it's more about what was happening in, like, personally trying to overcome those challenges of now having a new baby, and now we're in this shock and awe, get everybody out, war is happening, and it's 16-hour days. You know, trying to work out daycare, you know, having my crib set up in my office, go get the kid, bring her back to keep working, because, you know, the mission had to keep going. So there's no time to rest. So it was just a very challenging time. But again, for me, you know, it's totally different because I wasn't the one going, I was the one staying behind. And so it's very interesting being on that perspective as well, I would say. I served for 20 years, and it's a combo of active duty and reserve time. And in my 20 years of service, I was never asked to deploy. So people say, well, did you go overseas? Did you see combat? And my answer is no, because the military never asked that of me. And I know that seems strange, but that's the reality of my life and my time in the military. So people are like, well, how could you not have gone anywhere? And it's just the way things work out. I mean, I certainly volunteered, especially early on. I'm like, pick me anywhere, I'll go anywhere, I'll do anything. And I can remember them, you know, at the Air Force Personnel Center saying, I can't believe I have a volunteer on the phone begging to go somewhere, and I have nowhere to send her. But that was just my reality of my time in service. And so, and in some ways that's, a lot of people are like, oh, that's great. But for me, it's kind of disappointing because you work and train so long towards something, and then you don't get to actually go do it. So that was, I would say, maybe a little disappointing, the fact that I never actually went anywhere.
Being on an aircraft carrier, being on a ship in general in the Navy, you get to go to port. And you're usually in port for a couple days, which is wonderful. Most of the time we get to get off the ship. And so I was really lucky, and I'm very grateful. I got to go to Dubai 3 times, which was incredible and a very good educational experience as far as culture. We would be walking through the mall in Dubai, and there would be a woman in a full burqa walking next to a woman in shorts and high heels. And it was really interesting to see kind of the juxtaposition of those two cultures in the area. And then on our way home, we were supposed to come straight home from the Middle East, and our captain was fantastic. He was wonderful and wanted us to have a special experience because we had been on deployment for so long. So he fought with the admiral and got us the chance to go to Australia for 6 days. So that's really memorable for me because Australia is a country I always wanted to go to, and we had a very extended port stay there. I think a good part of serving, and something important to mention, is just the people you get to serve with, and how there's a brotherhood and a camaraderie with that, and how important that is to being able to complete a mission or, you know, live day-to-day life away from your family and away from the luxuries of modern day. It's really important to have those strong relationships, and I'm forever grateful for those.